Now we're going to go hop into the ESI protocols and data collection. Again, ESI is that electronically stored information, and an ESI protocol is a mutually agreed upon plan on how both sides will access data and eventually make it available to opposing counsel. We like to think that there are 5 proven benefits to having this protocol in place. Basically, it's a roadmap for any one case. It's going to be addressing how you're identifying that data, how you're reviewing it, and how you're handing it over to the other side. This is all predetermined before the case even takes off, so that when you do start working on the case, both parties are on the same page as to how they should be going about handling the data throughout the process from beginning to end. And like it states here, it will allow you to think through the discovery for the entire matter. With all of this foresight, it will help to ensure that your client's data and their interests are protected. You'll identify the sources where the data is from. You can leverage the ESI protocol for this party data. And it really is just like a roadmap or blueprint for the case that you can keep referring back to throughout the entire process. And simply put, the ESI protocol is basically a contract for the case on how to handle things between the two parties. We have a professional services team that specializes on working with firms on creating a standardized ESI protocol that fits their line of work, that they're going to use as kind of like that template, that this is how we would expect it to go when we meet and confer with opposing counsel. This is what we're going to present to them. If they have any objections, we can alter it kind of minutely and change some details, but this is pretty standard what we would like to do from here on moving forward. When you're initially identifying the data, preservation is obviously important. You have to decide where it is and preserve it as soon as possible. You'll also want to agree on the scope of the collection. I like to think of the scope of collection kind of like that fairy tale, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You're going to want to identify the collection scope that is just right for your case. You don't want way too much data, but you certainly don't want too little that you are missing out on some highly relevant information. And you might think that you would want everything, but for example, when collecting from an iPhone, you probably want to collect information like the messages contained on it or the emails exchanged from that device, but you probably don't need to know their Angry Birds high score, even though it's stored in the phone. And I know that Angry Birds is a very outdated app. It's just the last time that I ever played games on my phone. So I don't know what people are playing today. I was always big on solitaire, but just wanted to give an example. A phased approach is best for identifying and collecting the data. So let's start with this data. So let's look at these dates. Do we need all of these dates, or why don't we focus on dates leading up to the issue and beyond? So that's where the phased approach comes into play. And then here's my favorite tip of all of these. If you walk away with anything, this is one of the things I hope you bring with you, because not everyone in the legal industry necessarily thinks about this when collecting data. Just make sure that you avoid fingerprints as much as possible. And what I mean by this is, an example of leaving a fingerprint when collecting data would be having a client forward you emails and then using those forwarded emails instead of collecting the originals instead. The way I like to describe it is when emails are forwarded instead of collecting the originals or the natives, it's like crossing that yellow tape that says do not cross, or whatever it actually says in real life, like in Law and Order, but in the data world. So when lawyers start using emails that have been forwarded to them, they have inserted themselves into that metaphorical virtual crime scene and walked past the tape that they should not have walked past. It's much easier to do with emails than with tape in real life, because forwarded emails don't give you any sort of alert letting you know that you shouldn't be using them, whereas tape, you can probably see and feel it if you're walking past it. But the reason that you wouldn't want to do this is that you should be going to the source and collecting that native or original files, so that the metadata fields that you'll be collecting will be that you'll be using to search and identify documents will be correct, and you won't have fingerprints on them. And we'll talk about that metadata in just a second for those wondering what that means. But if the original email was sent on January of 2007, but then the case takes place in 2021 and you have that email forwarded to you, instead of saying January of 2007, it's going to say October of 2021, because that's the most recent time it was altered or sent. And so that's how you can kind of affect the metadata if you don't collect natively. So before moving on to the next slide, I want to point out a way that NextPoint helps you collect those original documents without putting your fingerprints on them by utilizing the request files functionality. So you can see on this image, this function is located in our file room, which will allow you to easily and securely collect documents straight from the source, whether that is from your client, opposing counsel, or whoever. You can send them a link to their email that will allow them to drop documents and files into our Dropbox. This is what it looks like. They'll be directed to a page that looks like our file room, but they won't have access to anything that you've already placed in there. It's just going to look like a blank file room on their end. Only you will actually have access to that information. And this tool is one that many of our customers really enjoy when it comes to the collection process. We not only like to stress the ease of use but also the security is probably the biggest selling point. So a lot of lawyers will use Dropbox for their clients, and that process will look something like the client uploads their documents to the Dropbox from their local computer. The lawyers then download the documents to his or her computer before then re-uploading to whatever Ediscovery platform they are using. And now all of these documents are living all over the place, and the request files function kind of removes that middle step, obviously makes it easier, reduces the number of locations that the information is being stored, and it gets it backed up by Amazon Web Services S3 in the cloud as quickly as possible. So I just like pointing out the security benefits to this when it comes to protecting your client's data. So let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into some of the vocabulary that we're going to be using that you'll most likely need to know when using NextPoint or just Ediscovery as a whole. Starting with meet and confer. This is where the ESI protocol would come into place. Under the federal rules of civil procedure, the parties are required to meet to negotiate a plan that will reduce costs and burdens for each side. Essentially, it's just a meeting ahead to make things as efficient and effective as possible. I think that we're all have an idea of meet and confer. Second, what are PST and MBOX? These are simply fancy ways of saying a zip folder for someone's inbox. PST generally denotes that it is an inbox pertaining to Outlook, while MBOX stands for inboxes pertaining to Gmail accounts. As defined here, they are common container formats used to store messages, calendar events, and other items. Going one step forward from these inboxes to the custodian. The custodian is the owner of that inbox. So the individual whose file system a group of records were extracted from. So as an example, if I were in some sort of litigation and they wanted to collect my inbox, they would collect my MBOX since I use Gmail. And Jack Lipinski would be considered the custodian of that inbox. Defensible deletions. Parties identify and eliminate inessential data so that it doesn't overwhelm efforts. As you can imagine, data is only growing, especially with everyone being remote nowadays. More and more communications, documents, et cetera, are being shared online than ever before. So cases continually are having more and more data than cases before them, but a lot of this data really isn't all that important to the litigation process. So defensible deletion is when you can identify and delete that inessential data. Those Angry Birds apps or spam mail that people are trying to reach out to you about your car's extended warranty. That's generally a voicemail for me. I don't know how many people have that going on, but you can just go ahead and delete this data as it's not pertinent to the case. And I told you that we would be talking about metadata soon enough. And the way I like to describe it is that metadata is essentially just the data about data. And I know that that sounds boring, but it's really important. It describes the characteristics of the ESI. So it's not just like, for example, when you collect an email, it's not just about the content that's being discussed in the email. It's also who was on the email, who was it from, who was BCC'd, when was it sent, what's the subject of the email, so on and so forth. All of that information is going to be considered metadata. And this is just some of the metadata that tells us, I feel like I'm saying data a lot, but it tells us more about that data as an example, just that email as an example, that's going to help us get organized and find what is common, what we're looking for. It's just hugely helpful throughout this process. And then last but not least is that MD5 hash, which is defined as an algorithm used to verify data integrity. It's claimed to be as unique as a fingerprint. So when a document is imported into any system like NextPoint, it gets assigned an MD5 hash, and that helps with the deduplication component. As you can imagine, multiple people receive the same email in a case, so deduplication could be its own course that could be taught over hours, but an MD5 hash is going to be one of the first ways that allows you to go about identifying duplicates and how you can look at that data and how it is received.